So the story I'm going to read for you guys is called Bad Traffic. And I know that sounds like an LA thing, but it actually takes place in New York. And this is a story that somehow ended up, it was one of those rare stories that just sort of dropped into my head in one piece. I knew it, like as soon as I had the idea, I knew exactly what it was. I knew exactly the tone. I knew the character, and I knew how it was going to end. So this is Bad Traffic. Let me do one more sip before I go. The rain came suddenly and surprised everyone on Fifth Avenue. Fuck, Chelsea Bruntrick said out loud. She looked up in a panic. Her stomach tightened, and she raised both hands above her head. Gray clouds had formed above the Manhattan sky. Her stylist had spent the last 4 hours getting her new haircut just right, and Chelsea had dropped $500, not including tip. Her layered, shoulder-length hair was now an electric metallic blue, with highlights that made her look like someone out of Blade Runner. Chelsea was thrilled with how it turned out. She'd been scrolling through her photos on the sidewalk, deciding which photo to post. But now, the rain threatened to ruin that for her. Not to mention the brand new top she had worn out of the store down the street. That shit was far too expensive to get wet. Chelsea raised her hand to hail the nearest cab, while other pedestrians ran into shops or under awnings. Some older folks held newspapers over their heads. A few brave souls continued on their way without missing their stride. Her hand wasn't in the air for long before a boxy yellow cab cut across 2 lanes and veered toward her. The rain picked up. Every drop on her head made her more and more anxious. Chelsea's bracelets rattled together with a loud jangle of metal on her wrist as she rushed toward the cabbie. The cab got closer, and the dented fender scraped the sidewalk as it pulled over. Chelsea got a good look at the old, beat-up yellow car and wondered if it was left over from the 70s. It looked out of place, out of time. It's a ride, it's out of the rain, it'll do, she thought. But when Chelsea stepped forward to grab the door handle, the cab passed by, like the driver hadn't seen her. It continued forward in the bike lane and rolled to a stop about 20 feet in front of her. Waiting there on the sidewalk was an old lady with thinning, straw-like gray hair, wearing decades-old sweatpants and a matching sweatshirt. Appalled at the audacity of this cabbie, Chelsea's panic dissolved and gave way to anger. Instead of hailing another cab, she marched over to the beat-up yellow car that could have been used on old episodes of Taxi and stepped in front of the old lady as she reached out for the door. "Excuse me," Chelsea said and pulled open the door. The old lady put a hand on Chelsea's back to avoid being knocked over. Chelsea ignored the physical contact and slipped into the cab, making a point to slam the door behind her. She shoved the lock into place, then pulled up her phone and picked up where she'd left off with her new hair selfies. The old lady bent down, peered into the window for a long moment. Chelsea shivered at the sight of her. Up close, she looked older than Chelsea expected. She wore no makeup or jewelry. Her hair was a tangled mess. Deep wrinkles marked her face. Her cheeks sagged as if melting down her jaw, and her deep sunken eyes made her look like she was already dead. "Where to?" the chubby, unshaven cab driver asked. "Brooklyn, Cobble Hill," Chelsea said with an urgency. "Might take a little while in this traffic," he said. A glance at the cabbie's license allowed her to personalize the aggressive order. "I don't care, Larry, just drive, please." Larry looked back through the scratched fiberglass. "You got it, miss." He turned back in his seat, shifted the car into gear, and looked over his left shoulder for a break in the long line of cars. The old lady held her glare, the disdain in her eyes unmistakable. Chelsea continued to ignore her. The rain came down harder, dumping buckets on everyone who hadn't found cover. The old lady raised a hand with her bulbous knuckles and thin fingers rapped on the window 3 times. "It's my cab, ma'am, okay? I hailed it, it pulled over, it's my cab, just get the next one," Chelsea said with a dismissive wave. "The rain could do you some good, miss." The old lady's dry, cracked voice all but spewed dust from her mouth. Chelsea kept her eyes off the old lady's face and looked up to the cabbie instead. "Larry, can you drive, please?" she demanded. "Bad traffic, miss. Soon as I can pull out, I will," Larry said. The old lady didn't move, didn't even blink. Water dripped down her forehead, into her eyes, down her cheeks. Her soaked-through sweatpants changed from raggedy light gray to droopy dark gray, but she didn't move. The old lady raised her fragile hand and pressed a finger against the glass. The rain hadn't yet washed away the dust and dirt from the window, and the old woman dragged her finger down, then up and across, back to the starting point to complete a 5-pointed star. Around the pentagram, she drew a perfect circle and added several dashes like a clock face. Chelsea shivered and looked up to see the old lady's horrible face through a symbol that looked like the devil's timepiece. At last, the car lurched forward and pulled out into traffic. The old lady stayed where she was and watched the car drive away. Chelsea looked one last time through the back window to make sure she wasn't chasing after them. The old lady remained where she was, hunched and still like a melting statue. Her body shook as she tried to rid herself of the creepy experience. In this dense traffic, the cab could only crawl down the street, but at least it was moving. Rain pounded the roof of the car now, filling the cab with a deep metallic rumble. If Chelsea had any reason to speak to Larry, he probably wouldn't be able to hear her over the roar of the storm. She scanned the interior of the ancient, disgusting vehicle and considered that maybe she had made a mistake. She should have let the old lady have the cab. The sticky leather seats had popped stitches with stuffing poking through in a few places. The armrest on the door had sunken into the point that it hurt her elbow as she leaned on it. The headrest was jammed into place way too high for her. But none of that really mattered. What mattered was that her hair and her clothes were dry. "Brooklyn Bridge okay with you?" Larry asked. "Sure, whatever," Chelsea shouted over the rain. Larry nodded and turned back to the road. The Brooklyn Bridge moved at a crawl during rush hour. The ride would be at least 30 minutes, but she figured she could handle that. She took the Bluetooth headphones from her purse and rested them in her ears, making sure Larry saw her do it. She hated conversations with strangers, but she hated her music being interrupted even more. Once she heard the chimes signaling a successful pairing with her phone, she hit play on the music app and leaned her head back. Billie Eilish was first on her playlist, which fit her mood perfectly, calm and creepy. The back of her head rested on top of the cracked leather seat. She pressed her forehead against the glass of the window and settled in for the ride. The symbol that old woman had drawn was still there, impervious to the rain. Through the dirty window, Chelsea watched all the poor saps who were stuck outside, huddled under umbrellas, hot dog stands, newspaper kiosks, or the entrance to posh stores that wouldn't let them in to find refuge. Thank God for this gross cab, Chelsea thought. The music in her ears cut out suddenly, breaking Chelsea out of her relaxing daze. Chaotic sounds of the city and the incessant pounding of the rain came flooding back. She tapped her headphones, but that did nothing. The red light on the small power pack blinked at her. The batteries were dead. Confused, Chelsea tried putting the headphones back into the charger and taking them out again, but she got the same results. I charged these all night. I haven't even touched them today, she thought. There's no way they're dead. Must be broken. Shit. She gave up hope with the headphones and played music at a low volume on her phone speakers. It was harder to focus on the music, but that's all she could manage. She kept her eyes on Larry to see if he would care and breathed a small sigh of relief when he didn't look back. Her phone lit up with a message from her mother. "Chelsea, when are you coming home?" Chelsea rolled her eyes and texted back, her thumbs moving at light speed. "In a cab, on my way from Manhattan." Almost immediately, another text from her mother. "Thought you left hours ago." "What?" Chelsea asked herself. She swiped away from her text to look at the time. It was nearing 5 in the afternoon. She'd been in the cab for over an hour. That can't be right, she thought. Her head swiveled as she looked around outside, trying to find a landmark of some kind so she could orient herself in the city. Incredibly, they'd only gone a few blocks. The cab had picked her up at 72nd Street and come to a halt at 67th. They hadn't even cleared Central Park yet, and she would have sworn that no more than 15 minutes had gone by. Chelsea leaned forward and broke her own rule about chatting with strangers. "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me what time it is?" Larry looked back at her with suspicion and then checked his watch. 4:45, miss, he grumbled back at her. That's what her phone had told her too. "We've been driving for over an hour?" "That's right," Larry said, pointing to the meter next to him. "Shit," she said. The fare was sitting at $80. "How have we only moved 5 blocks in an hour?" "Bad traffic today. Storm is slowing everyone down," he said. Just as she clicked her phone to text her mother back, the battery light blinked a few times before the phone shut off. No, what the fuck? Chelsea said, furiously tapping the touchscreen and pressing the phone's side buttons, but nothing turned it back on. The phone was dead, just like the headphones. Everything okay, ma'am? Larry asked. Yeah, I guess. You wouldn't happen to have a phone charger, would you? Sorry, I'm not an Uber, he said, resentful of the question. Didn't think so. Chelsea leaned back and sighed. She'd been so excited to show her mother and sisters the picture of the blue treatment, her mom didn't believe it would look good, but Chelsea was ready to prove her wrong. But if the traffic continued this way, it would take hours to get back. And God forbid her hair got wet before she could rub it in her mother's face. She would have to go through the drive in total silence, no communication with the outside world. She lifted her knees, curled up into a ball in the back seat. Phone in hand again, she used the black glass face as a mirror and ran her fingers through her smooth, straight hair so she could see the new layers. The electric blue wasn't as piercing and bright in their reflection. It was still a nice cut, but Chelsea was disappointed that the color had already lost some of its boldness. That's so strange, she thought. The color is supposed to pop for months. With one last run of her fingers, Chelsea shook her hair out to get it all back into place. When it settled, she gasped. Her stomach lurched up toward her throat. She drew the phone closer, inspecting the reflection with her eyes wide open. Her free hand reached up to the middle of her head, to the part in her new haircut. No fucking way, Chelsea muttered in dull shock. A dark brown line had formed at the base of her skull. She ran a finger down the part and blinked rapidly a couple times to make sure she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. Chelsea dug out her compact and flipped it open to look into the mirror. And sure enough, her roots had grown out. How does this happen? She thought. They painted my scalp for Christ's sake. But there it was in front of her, natural roots under all that electric blue. It looked to be about 2 months of hair growth. Chelsea didn't know what to do, but her heart pounded and her palms were damp. The cab still hadn't gone further than 5 blocks. The car inched forward and stopped every 15 seconds. Chelsea shook with panic. Larry, can you please tell me the time again? She asked. The cabbie turned around slowly, but Chelsea met his eyes with a shock. It wasn't Larry who looked back. It's 7 o'clock, miss. But my name isn't Larry, it's Rashad. A chill moved down Chelsea's spine as she stared for a few stunned moments at this young, round face with carefully styled stubble on his cheeks and a Yankees ball cap. Her eyes drifted down to the license displayed on the dash. Sure enough, the name there was Rashad. What happened to Larry? She blurted out. I'm sorry, who's Larry? Rashad asked. The guy who was driving this cab before. Oh, Rashad said. I think the guy who drove this cab before me was named Larry, but I'm pretty sure he left the city months ago. Chelsea shook her head. Her mind danced and swirled, trying to make sense of everything. How is that possible? She asked. Her voice quivered. I'm not sure what you mean, miss, Rashad said. But don't worry, we'll get you through this traffic and get you home. No more words came to her. She sat and stared out the window, feeling insane. The frustration and confusion brought tears that she had tried to hide from Rashad. The old lady's devil clock hadn't washed off the window. Through it, Chelsea watched the city limp by, getting wetter by the second. The downpour continued flooding the streets. Car horns blared, the occasional person yelled for no good reason. Soaked groups of kids marched along, led by ambitious teachers. The rain just wouldn't let up. A bus pulled alongside them and blocked Chelsea's window. Without a view of the street, she was left with her own reflection to stare at. With her nose nearly pressed against the glass, she brought her hands to her face and squinted at the clear and distinct crow's feet beneath both eyes. She gasped as her fingers brushed her cheeks, her jaw, her neck. Her skin felt rough and loose as she pulled the folds back to remove wrinkles she had never seen before. This is actually pretty good ambiance back here. When she let go, the wrinkles around her eyes returned, as though they'd been there for years. Chelsea began to question her own sanity now. She looked less like a pretty young 20-something and more like one of her mom's friends, one that had a couple toddlers and a distant husband. The cab pulled away from the bus and stopped at Park Avenue and 39th Street, where Chelsea expected to see the Park Avenue Tavern on the corner. Among the familiar bars and restaurants, there stood only an empty lot with a chain-link fence surrounding the place. What happened to the tavern? Chelsea asked. Park Avenue Tavern? Shit, that burned down over a year ago, Rashad said. A year ago? What are you talking about? I was there last week. Rashad furrowed his brow again. Sorry, miss, you must be mistaken. My brother was on the crew that tore it down after the fire, and that was definitely last year. No, it was my friend Shelley's birthday and she wanted to go somewhere small. We went there because a mutual friend knew the owner. I know the place. It's got the hardwood floors, square tile ceilings, framed pictures cover the walls, Chelsea insisted. That's the place, but I'm telling you, it ain't been there since last April, miss. Rashad drove them through the intersection, leaving behind the empty lot that sparked their debate. Chelsea looked down at her feet, helplessly trying to make sense of everything going on around her, when a light flashed across the sky and thunder crashed. The entire street rattled. For a moment, she thought the car had been struck by lightning. The rain intensified and rumbled louder on the roof of the old car. She wanted out, wanted to stop the constant sound of pounding rain, wanted to check herself in a big mirror, not a reflection on a dead phone screen or in a tiny compact. She wanted to charge her phone and call her mother. Rashad, I'd like to get out of the car, please, Chelsea said as calmly as she could manage. She pulled at the handle before he could reply, but it stuck. The door wouldn't open. When he turned around, Rashad's youthful, round face was gone, replaced by a thin, clean-shaven, middle-aged man. He could have been Rashad's father. Sorry, ma'am, can't let you out in the middle of the street like this. He had a couple of missing teeth on the bottom of his mouth. And how do you know my name? We know each other? We just met a few minutes ago, Chelsea said with a stammer. I'm sorry, ma'am, no recollection of... He started. But he stopped when he got a good look at her face. Her eyes in particular. Dear God, it's you, ain't it? The voice was airy and bewildered. What do you mean? She asked, afraid of the answer. Where have you been all this time? What? I've been here. I haven't gone anywhere. What's happening? Confused tears welled up in her eyes, and her face scrunched up, adding more wrinkles to her already damaged skin. The traffic jammed up again. Rashad stopped the car and turned around to face Chelsea. His eyes were wide, like he wanted to make sure she was real. You were in my cab, he explained. You were acting very strange, asking for someone else, another driver. Larry, she reminded him. His eyes opened wide again at the revelation. That's right, you were looking for Larry. Then you were gone. No one ever heard from you. Police questioned me. For a time, they thought I'd killed you and buried your body and shit. I figured you just stepped out, skipped out on the tab, and ran away. But I don't understand, Chelsea said, crying through the confusion. How can that be? I haven't left this cab. Rashad's face sank with sadness as he delivered his next words. Ma'am, ain't nobody seen you in 15 years. She frantically looked around for something to prove she was telling the truth. Chelsea's head whipped side to side, but there was nothing. Nothing except... The window, she shouted in a frenzy. Look at the window. Rashad's eyes drifted over to her window, but he shook his head. I don't understand. What about it? That lady, the crazy one right before we pulled out. She drew on that window, and it's been there this whole time. Just look. She yelled in the hope he would understand if she spoke louder, but there was no recognition on his face. I'm sorry I haven't seen it until now, he said, regretful. Chelsea put her hands in her face and let herself cry. Just take me home to my family, please. I promise to get you there as fast as I can. There's some real bad traffic today, ma'am. Rashad turned back to the street. Tears poured from Chelsea's eyes like two faucets with steady leaks. She had done what she could to avoid her new top getting wet, but now her heavy tears were soaking the front of it anyway. Plus, the colors had faded, the shoulders had thinned, threads were coming loose on the sleeves. The thought of protecting it now seemed silly. She sniffled and wiped her nose when she felt a sudden sharp pain in her hand. The deep ache started in her knuckles and radiated through her fingertips. With her hand resting in her lap, she opened and closed her fingers, feeling the bones rub together and the pain in her joints intensifying. The sound of a small airplane or a heavy drone joined the chorus of engines, horns, voices on the street and vibrated against her window. Chelsea looked out as a large shape zipped through the air a few feet from the traffic to her left. Her eyes couldn't focus, but she was sure she had seen a boot on the side of it. She leaned forward and watched through the windshield as it flew on, coasting above all the slow-moving cars. A flying motorcycle, Chelsea thought, shaking her head in disbelief. The vehicle sped forward over the heads of the traffic, then turned left over the Manhattan Bridge and out of sight. The sputtering sound trailed behind it, and after a few moments that faded too. "What the hell was that?" Chelsea asked. "Nothing to worry about, ma'am." Another new voice emerged from behind the wheel. Chelsea looked up to see a heavy-set man with a pockmarked face and a nose covered in dark red veins. "Just an air bike." Chelsea was stunned again, both by the new face at the wheel and the news that the flying vehicle seemed to be nothing of note. Time had passed faster than she could comprehend. She couldn't even recognize the streets that in the once familiar neighborhood. New businesses had come and gone while she sat in this godforsaken cab. That realization made her snatch up her compact and flip open the mirror in a panic. Her eyes went huge with a shock when her blue hair was now completely gray and wiry. No, no, no. Pleading with nobody in particular, she prayed what she saw wasn't real. She lowered the mirror to her face. All across her forehead, her eyes, her cheeks were wrinkles, deep and defined. Closing the mirror, she noticed how old her hands looked, how swollen her knuckles were, how many dark spots that weren't there only a few minutes before. The ache in her hands had gotten far worse, and she couldn't keep her fingers open without serious pain. "Sir," she said to the new cabbie, her voice trembling, "my name is Chelsea Brunswick. Do you know that name?" The cabbie pondered it for a moment, but shook his head. "Sorry, lady, doesn't ring a bell. You famous or something?" he asked. "What year is it?" she asked boldly. "The year? 2054, ma'am." "Oh, God," Chelsea said, her eyes closed, and tears fell again. 30 years. The chubby man at the wheel looked carefully at the rearview mirror. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Chelsea grasped for the right words to explain. "I'm an old lady," she told him, holding up her hands and touching them to her wrinkled cheeks. Assuming she was fishing for compliments, the cabbie smiled wide and said, "Nah, you're not old, my dear. You're still a beautiful woman of what, 55? "I'm 20, Chelsea said. The cabbie stopped, looked her over again, checked the math. "There's no need to lie to yourself, ma'am. Embrace your age. There's grace in that." Another air bike whizzed by, and Chelsea jumped at the unexpected sound. The cabbie saw her reflection and smiled kindly. "Yeah, they're a nuisance. Government doesn't know how to regulate them yet, but they won't ban the damn things because they're supposed to ease the traffic. But as you can see," he held out his hand, presenting the traffic jam in front of them, "it's not done a damn thing. Traffic's as bad as ever." "You're right about that," Chelsea said. "Will you let me out of here?" "We're just pulling onto the bridge, ma'am. I'm afraid I can't let you out here. Against company policy." "Screw your company policy. I'll lose another 20 years if we go across the bridge." The cabbie threw his hands up, shouting back to her, "What do you want me to do? The storm is slowing everyone down. It's going to take as long as it takes, okay? I can't make the city move faster." "I'm going to die in here," Chelsea thought. "I'm going to wither away before we reach the end of this bridge." As expected, the bridge was jammed full of cars. Nobody moved. Chelsea's body changed more, grew weaker by the moment. Her heartbeat slowed, her vision blurred. She ran a hand through her hair, and a large clump of coarse gray strands laid in her palm. The arthritis was so bad that she wouldn't even try to open her fingers. Pain pulsed through her joints while completely still. Chelsea fought the urge to vomit as she felt her organs shift. She had unfamiliar cramps in her abdomen. Her liver hurt. Her kidneys swelled, twisted, and throbbed in her lower back. The cab inched forward and stopped again. More air bikes buzzed overhead, 5 in a row this time. Chelsea wheezed with each dry breath, making her more nauseous. Holding back her vomit, she reached up a crooked hand to the door handle. She suffered through the pain in her bones and lifted her right arm with her left, dropped her fingers behind the silver door handle, and pulled to get the door open just a crack. Chelsea felt the rush of cool, humid air. She took in a deep breath. It smelled different out there, not like the usual garbage and gasoline smell of a New York City street. There was a sharpness to it, with a crisp jolt in her nose, like the air around them had been electrified. This wasn't the world she knew at all. The ka-thunk of the door latch grabbed the cabbie's attention, and he whipped his head around. "Hey," he shouted, sending little drops of spittle onto the fiberglass partition. "That door stays closed when this car is in motion." "I need to get out of here," Chelsea said with a croaked, breathy old woman's voice. "I can't stay in this cab another minute, please." The weak sound of her own voice destroyed any fight she had in her. "Close it now," the cabbie demanded, ignoring her plea. With a fair amount of effort, Chelsea managed to pull the door closed again. The electric smell was gone, replaced with her own smell of stale perfume and decay. When the lock slid into place, it sent a shot of deep searing pain from her fingers, through her wrist, and up her right arm as if her brittle bones were held together by threads of fishing lines. There has to be something I can do, Chelsea thought, her mind racing for an answer. The veiny-nosed cabbie held his suspicious gaze on her for a moment longer, then turned back to the road. The traffic had finally loosened. The cab rolled forward at a slow but steady pace. Chelsea was tired, her eyes heavy, her breaths deep and slow. The storm outside wouldn't let up for a moment. The rain pounded the roof like an overturned metal bin. Chelsea rested her head on the headrest and closed her eyes. She wasn't sure how much time she had left on the road, but she was certain she wouldn't make her destination. A cracking sound filled the back of the cab as Chelsea's spine arched forward. Her shoulders hunched and she craned her neck. Her hands dangled from her wrists like broken branches. The skin hung from her thin face, and she found it more and more difficult to speak clearly. "What's your name?" she asked the latest cabbie. "Bart," he said, somehow making his name sound like a burp. "Bart, I want you to do me a favor, a very simple one. I want you to remember my name, Chelsea Brunswick." "Okay, I can do that," he said, unsure. "People have been looking for me. They've probably been looking for a very long time. But as it turns out, you're in a unique position to know the truth." The cab made it across the bridge and took the first left, heading into a lighter, more normal flow of traffic. "Say, are you okay, lady?" Bart asked. "No, I'm certainly not," Chelsea said. Drips of spittle dotted her chin as she spoke. "Well, Chelsea Brunswick, what exactly should I say when people are asked where you've been?" As she pondered her answer to Bart's question, Chelsea looked out the window at the passing buildings. Nothing was familiar. Not the shops, the people, the houses, nothing. Everything she saw was bright and glowing with colorful lights. The cars were different too, all of them smaller, rounder, sleeker than the SUVs she was used to seeing around this neighborhood. "Tell them I was stuck in traffic," she said. The cab drove on at a normal speed now, but Chelsea hardly cared. She lost sight in her left eye as large cataracts formed a few blocks away from home. Everything sounded as if she was underwater, competing to be heard over the high-pitched tinnitus ringing in her head. There was an awful taste in her mouth, like stinking old coffee and dried dirt, or rotted fruit. She pressed against the back of her front teeth with her tongue and felt a distinct pop in her gums. Blood oozed out right away, but it took a few moments for the pain to erupt. Her front tooth fell from the open hole and rattled around in her mouth before she spit the rotted bone into her hand. Chelsea knew she was done for. Her tired, old, wrinkled body was falling apart in front of her eyes. With one finger, she touched the open hole in her gums. The exposed nerve stung like an electric shock through her whole body. The other front tooth wiggled in its place. With her thumb and forefinger, she slowly pulled it. More blood oozed. More molded fruit taste topped her tongue. The tooth ripped away from the gums easily with a sickening wet squish, like pulling a seed from the guts of a pumpkin. The two loose teeth bounced off each other like dice in the palm of her shaking hand. Chelsea lifted the compact mirror again. The skin on her face drooped so much you could see the red beneath her eyeballs. Her ears held earrings that sagged down almost to her shoulders. She was at least 90 years old. With her back hunched and shaking with effort, she raised her head and watched as the cab slowly pulled onto her street. When she left that morning, the buildings were mostly run down, in need of restoration. Now, everything was in pristine condition. The buildings all had big, beautiful windows. Everything was stunning. Her building had retained an old-fashioned look with modern flares, like perfectly uniform bricks or a rounded exterior tile that made one complex look like it had terrible acne. It was all remarkably strange. She couldn't picture her family living in such an insane-looking building, but where else could she go? "Right here," Chelsea croaked. Speaking loud enough took a lot of energy from her. The car pulled out of traffic and glided along the sidewalk. The fender scraped the curb as it straightened out. The rain hadn't let up. The downpour dumped buckets of water onto the sidewalk, onto the car, onto the poor saps who were stuck outside. But Chelsea was dry. The symbol on the window remained, clear as day. Chelsea was an old lady now, much older than the old lady in sweatpants. Chelsea's mind faded with thin memories, both real and imagined. As the cab rolled to a stop at last, Chelsea's breath slowed. The cabbie turned around to reveal yet another new face. This time it was a woman, with tangled hair stuffed under a baseball cap. She had one lazy eye that stared out the window while her good eye was trained on Chelsea. "All right, ma'am, that's a total of $260. Sorry for the large fare, but that was some bad traffic back there." Chelsea could no longer speak. All she could manage was an airy moan that leaked from her lungs through tired vocal cords. She reached her hand up to grab her purse, but her motor skills failed, and she knocked the purse onto the sticky floor of the back seat. The new cabbie sighed and threw her car into park. "I'll help you get out, just a sec," she said begrudgingly. The cabbie stepped out into the rain, made her way along the car, leaving Chelsea in the back seat alone. As the cabbie walked across the front of the cab, Chelsea pulled in one final breath. She looked down at her hand, resting in her lap, and watched as her fingers turned a lifeless pale white, then began to disintegrate. Her fingers turned to dust and floated down to the seat and the floor. It piled up, atom by atom, like a child pouring sand from a shovel. The dust crumbled up her hands, her arms, her feet, and legs, taking the pain and stiffness away. When the cabbie reached the passenger side, her arms and legs were gone, adding to the growing pile on the sticky floor. Her head turned toward the window as the cabbie reached her door. The dust took her shoulders, her neck. The last thing she saw as her jaw and face fell to dust was the cabbie putting her hand on the window in the center of the symbol as she was freed from her physical form. The cabbie yanked open the door, but leapt back when a dense cloud poured out of the back seat. "Oh shit," she exclaimed, waving a hand in front of her face, blowing away the dust. A few pedestrians stopped to look, but as New Yorkers tend to do, they went on with their business. Large piles of dust sat on the back seat and the floor right where the old woman had been. The cabbie leaned into the back to see if there was anything else to find. A purse had fallen off the seat, the contents spilled onto the floor. The cabbie's eyes landed on a very old driver's license. With care, she picked it up and brushed off the dust. The name read Chelsea Brunswick. "Chelsea Brunswick, I've heard that name," she said to herself, bewildered. The cabbie slipped the license into her pocket and went around to the back of the car for cleaning supplies. Just then, a pedestrian stepped up next to the open door, hunched over and moving slowly. An old lady wearing faded gray sweatpants and a matching sweatshirt, drenched from head to toe. She grinned as she saw the dust pile on the back seat. She reached a shaky hand forward and pushed her open fingers into the dust. She lifted a handful out of the cab and held it right in front of her face. Rain hit the thin powder and ran through her fingers, dropping onto the sidewalk, where it mixed with the rushing water and washed away down the storm drains. A smile cracked across the old lady's face as the rain washed her hands clean. "I told you before, my dear," she croaked. "This rain could have done you some good." That's it. It's funny, I think reading that story was similar to her at the car. I'm like, I don't know how much time has passed. That could have been 2 hours. But thank you so much.